We've looked extensively at evolution, but the evolution that we've been looking at so far has been of a biological nature, involving natural selection and so on and so forth. But there's another kind of evolution called cultural evolution, and that's what this segment is going to deal with. So when we're talking about cultural evolution, it's not the same as biological evolution. It's non-genetic transmission of habits across generations. So biological evolution is leaving genes to the next generation. This is not doing that, at least not directly. I guess indirectly it would, but directly we're talking about non-genetic transmission of habits across generations. It happens very quickly because it's non-genetic. And there are various criteria for culturally evolved traits. The first, it's some kind of habit that's customarily shown by most individuals in at least one location. And it's absent in at least one other ecologically similar location. And it's socially transmitted. Okay, so if these three criteria fit a particular behavior, then it's pretty safe to conclude that it's been culturally evolved. So there's four possible modes of cultural evolution, mechanisms of cultural evolution, call it whatever you like. And we're going to use as our example, a human example. What kind of beer do you like to drink? Because there's an awful lot out there to choose from. Just a small sample here. I like Gritty McDuff's. Hard to find. Okay. What kind of beer do you like? Well, the first mode is called the deterministic mode. And that is where you learn to do what a relative did. It typically would be a parental figure, father or mother. So you drink whatever brand of beer your father drank or your mother drank or whatever. The direct mode is where you try out different brands that are available in your location, and then you decide which one you like the best. The indirect mode is where you drink whatever your favorite athlete, hero, rock star, movie star, whatever, but a non-relative is drinking. And of course that's used in marketing all the time, where they have actors and athletes that are advertising beers or some other product. That's the indirect mode. And finally, we have the frequency-dependent mode of cultural evolution, where you drink whatever is the most popular at your particular site, your particular location. Okay, so those are four possible modes of cultural evolution. Question is, do animals have culture? And the obvious answer is yes, of course they do. And one of the earliest observations of this happened in the United Kingdom. It was a phenomenon called milk bottle opening, and it was done by great tits in a particular neighborhood in one of the cities in the UK. Long time ago, and maybe they still do this, I have no idea, but I don't think they do it in this country, at least not where I live. There used to be milkmen that come out real early in the morning and leave milk on your doorstep. So you'd always have fresh milk. And originally the milk in the UK had these foil tops. It was fine. It worked very nicely until a great tit happened to accidentally discover that it could peck through it and skim off the top of the milk. And other great tits in that neighborhood actually copied that behavior, having observed this one bird do it. So it spread throughout the neighborhood, then throughout the entire area, and through most of the United Kingdom. So here we have another view. The trouble is, birds are dirty. All animals are dirty, including us for that matter. But in any event, they were putting bacteria, they were spreading bacteria, fostering bacterial growth in the milk, and so people were starting to get sick from these opened milk bottles. And so it actually forced an industry change in the UK. They went from the foil caps to these cardboard caps that the birds were unable to peck through. Another well-documented phenomenon, potato washing in Japanese macaques. And by the way, they don't only wash potatoes, they'll wash whatever you provision them with. It's also been observed with rice, as we'll see in another video coming up shortly. These are potatoes, though, that people gave them to eat. And, washing the sand off the potato, making it salty, which tastes good, as long as they're washing it in the ocean water, because sometimes it started out, actually, they were washing them in fresh water, and then ultimately started taking them to the beach in the ocean to do it there.
Macaques live in many parts of Japan, and one population of them has become famous all over the world for their inventiveness. These live on a tiny offshore island called Koshima. They're an isolated troop, and they've made some remarkable changes in their behavior. For a long time, people used to think that the way in which species like these feed is largely instinctive. But then in 1952, scientists came to this island, and in order to entice the monkeys out into the open so that they can observe them more closely, they started offering them sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes. Like that. After about a year, a young female called Emo began to take her roots down to a pool and wash off the sand and mud before eating them. Within a few weeks, her close friends and her family, including her mother, were copying her. The habit spread, and 10 years later, almost all the monkeys on the island habitually washed their sweet potatoes. Then a new variation arose. Instead of using fresh water, the monkeys took the roots down to the sea and washed them there, even when they were clean already. Perhaps they simply liked salt on their potatoes. Only the very old didn't adopt the new customs. The young were quick to learn, and the fact that babies travelled on their mother's back meant that they saw exactly what she was doing at all times, an unexpected benefit of having grasping hands. Then the scientists changed the diet to unhusked rice. They wanted to keep the monkeys in one place so that they could observe them, and they reckoned it would take them a long time to pick out the rice from the sand. But they had reckoned without Emo. She grabbed handfuls of rice and sand together and threw the whole lot into the water. The sand sank, the rice floated, and she quickly skimmed it off. And once again, the habit spread.
So from the original research article by the Japanese scientists, it began in 1953 by a 1.5-year-old female. And that soon spread to her mom and playmate, who observed her doing it. And then from them, sisters and brothers started to pick up the habit of potato washing. And after that, just about all members of the troops, except the very old males, also adopted that behavior. And then it spread to other troops because of these solitary wandering males that were just roaming from troop to troop. So there were some that were in that original troop. They roamed over to some other troop and other troops, several other troops, and it quickly just spread. But it was spreading culturally. It's not a species typical behavior, but rather a culturally evolved behavior. Song dialects. Okay, song dialects are also a good example of cultural evolution. So this is a species called the white-crowned sparrow. They're found on the west coast, and we're looking at the west coast of California, of course. So there's a population in Inverness. There's a population in Berkeley, just outside of San Francisco, and there's one down in Watsonville. Okay, 3 different populations. Now, they all sing species-typical courtship songs, which are also used as territorial songs, but with a twist. They all have different dialect variations. Inverness, Berkeley, Watsonville. And you can see just by looking at the sound spectrograms that there are differences. Here's what these sound like, starting with Inverness, Berkeley, Watsonville. So it's the males who sing these songs, and it turns out that the females from each of these areas, if given experimental choices, prefer to choose males uttering the dialect of their own location. An Inverness female, if given a choice between an Inverness male song and a Berkeley or Watsonville male song, will choose the Inverness male song. And the same with all these other possible combinations. Now, if there's no choice, I mean, if she's only hearing a Berkeley song, yeah, it's still a species-typical song, so she probably will, in fact, choose a male singing that song. But if given a choice, they prefer the dialect of their own group. And also other species, so these are cardinals. We have cardinals here on the East Coast. This is Ohio State University, and so there's differences between Ohio State and then just 10 miles away from campus. Song dialects in birds, and it's been observed in many, many species of birds. But it's also been observed in whales. That's a humpback whale song. Okay, so those sounds transmit very long distances underwater. So this was observed in Australia. There's a West Coast dialect, and there's an East Coast dialect. Okay, I think there's many more whales on the East Coast, by the way, than the West Coast. But what was observed is that in 1996, a few of the West Coast whales just migrated around Australia and ended up on the East Coast. So they're now intermixing with this East Coast population. Just 2 years later, all East Coast whales sang the West Coast dialect. And in terms of what the researchers observed, there were no exceptions to that. It was all the East Coast males that picked up that West Coast dialect, even though it was only a few West Coast males that were kind of, quote unquote, teaching them the dialect. So that was incredibly rapid. A 2-year period, that's unprecedented in terms of cultural evolution, at least in mammals, and certainly at least in song dialects. And of course, humans have dialects as well. You know, a native English-speaking person from the United States, depending on where you live, there's a Boston accent, a New York accent, a Philadelphia accent, just working our way up and down the coast. There's a Midwestern accent as we head west, and so on and so forth. Australia. Here's Australia. Well, you can't miss that. There's New Zealand down there. Okay, New Zealand. And guess what? That is New Caledonia. So you know where I'm heading with this. There's our good friend, the New Caledonian crow. They actually have cultural differences in tool making. I mean, it's amazing enough that they make tools, but there's also the cultural variation of it, and that's what this video describes.
New Caledonian crows have lots of good ideas. They are precision tool makers. This one is in the process of crafting something we normally expect only of humans. It's making a hook that it will use to catch prey. Alex Taylor is investigating whether these birds are able to share their tool-making skills with each other.
What the crows have done is they've rounded off the end and they've actually carved out a tip onto the end of the tool. So this tool works as a functional hook. Now this is really impressive because no other species actually makes hook tools apart from ourselves, not even chimpanzees.
And of even more interest to Alex are these intricately cut tools from the leaves of the pandanus tree. Unlike the hooks, there are distinctly different types of pandanus tool.
This is a single-step pandanus tool. Essentially, it's a rectangular piece of leaf that's been cut out from a larger piece of leaf. The crows have gone further than making a simple rectangle. They also make two-stepped tools. But what we've got is a step. So now the end is nice and fine, so the crow can get the tool into small areas.
The third and most elaborate type of tool is called a multi-step pandanus tool.
This tool has a series of steps cut into it. It has that very fine tip and again that broad end.
And across the island, different groups of crows use different types of these tools. In the south, more simple fragments are found. But as we move north, the crows start to favor more complex multi-step tools. That means that different groups of crows have their own ways of doing things. And in human society, we call this culture.
Animals are creating innovations, and they're actually passing them on to future generations by learning from one another. And basically what we can conclude is that there are many species of animals that have simple forms of culture. Humans are not alone for having culture, not at all.
So we're seeing different populations that have a single tradition. We've been collecting tools for the last 15, 20 years, and these traditions have persisted.
Are parents passing down these tool designs to their offspring? A rare glimpse of how this might happen has been captured on camera. Of all the birds, these crows have one of the longest juvenile periods, or childhoods. Youngsters stay with their parents for 2 years. Here, an adult bird is using a stick to probe for grubs hidden inside a log. A juvenile stands by and watches. The adult departs and leaves the stick in the hole. The younger bird can now try the tool out. Although this one has some way to go before becoming an expert like its parents. It looks like one way ideas spread through the crow population is through family groups, the social circle. And Alex's research suggests something even more extraordinary, that with each generation of crows, the tools are honed and improved.
The crows' tools have got progressively better over time. As they've passed on these tool designs between them, they've added small tweaks, and this has made the designs more and more efficient.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, they're getting better at it and passing the information along to subsequent generations. You can envision in 100 years, they'll probably be making battery-operated power tools or whatever. Well, probably not. But, you know, if there's any species other than us that's going to do that, it's going to be the New Caledonian crow. They are amazing animals, as we've now seen in a number of segments. Okay, and speaking of tool use, so here is a chimp that is basically teaching its offspring to crack a nut open using a log. Now, this is the first experimental evidence of learning of cultural traditions. So this was done in a lab, and it involved chimpanzees. So 2 different types of tools were used. Well, actually, not the tools. Same tool, a stick, but using it in different ways. So some chimps were trained to get food out of this apparatus by poking. So there's the apparatus. They had to poke into it with the stick and then get that little object all the way back, which would then release the food. Here's how it worked.
Okay.
And there's the food. So some were trained with that technique. Others were trained with the lift technique. Same apparatus, same stick, but instead of poking through that hole, you just lift the top latch to release the food. Works like this.
Yeah.
And there's the food. Poking versus lifting. So some of the chimps were trained to either one of those things, okay? Either pokers or lifters. They were then returned to their respective troops to see what would happen. There's a poker, there's a lifter. They each had 16 observers. Again, this is set up experimentally. And all the 16 observers who watched a poker became pokers. All of the 16 that watched a lifter became lifters. And here's a movie that shows some of this. So they're watching, these are observers watching a lifter lift. And see them watching quite attentively. And now one of those observers gets a chance to try it out and proceeds to lift. And here's an observer of a poker who's now poking. To get the food. Okay, so those are some of what are really many examples of culturally transmitted traits. Often another popular term for that is social transmission. Call it whatever you like. It's basically cultural evolution involving learning, not biological evolution, at least not directly. But obviously, you can see where if this happens in the wild, it could in fact play quite an important role in enhancing biological fitness.